Moving on, I'm pleased to introduce Achintya Ghosal, Youth Advisor to the British Council and the Regional Coordinator for the Indian Youth Climate Network. A passionate change maker, Achintya focuses on grassroots climate action with youth, and we are excited to have him moderate this fireside chat on building community resilience to climate impacts.
Hi everyone. Good evening, good morning to all joining in. Wonderful and pleasant hearing all the previous panelists and speakers talking about agriculture, how we can shift our regular, practices into green solutions. Today I have been joined by Manu, who will be talking us through community resilience and livelihoods and how we can avert the climate extreme and disasters that have been increasing day by day. And I'll probably start with my introduction and have a round of introduction with Manu and eventually join with some questions from the audience as well. Hi, everyone. I'm Achintya. I'm a Climate Corps Fellow with EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund. I also work with the British Council as the youth advisor for the Climate Skills Project, serving as the regional coordinator for the Indian Youth Climate Network, mostly where I found my passion for working in the climate discourse along with youth in the awareness, action, and advocacy domains. And I'm also currently pursuing my master's degree at Nalanda University. Um, that's pretty brief introduction about me, and I'll hand it over to Manu. Manu, you have been in this domain for about 30 years now. So how has it been for you? What's your journey? How it started, and where are you with seeds at this point?
Thank you, Achintya. First of all, it's a great pleasure meeting you and glad to know you're pursuing your master's in Nalanda. That's exactly where I started in Delhi School of Planning and Architecture. We co-founded this organization, Seeds, and that's what I've been doing the rest of my life, working towards building resilience of communities that are impacted by disasters and climate change. But I must add to my introduction the fact that, as young as perhaps you are, in the 1990s, I happened to be backpacking and doing some volunteer work with a community that was impacted by the cyclone in Kandla in Western India. And the thing that struck me there, it was a Category 2 cyclone, and but in few hours, about 4,000 people had died. And the reason for that kind of high life loss, Achintya, was because people did not know and about how they could protect themselves from such high wind velocities. A simple J hook could have saved their lives, a hook that could have held their roofs together and not blown away and hit them like missiles. And that's where I felt that, what am I doing? I have the training from one of the best colleges in India. And, here people are dying just because they don't even have access to that knowledge. And that's what our mission is. We've been working on that for these 30 years. Cynthia.
Great. I believe, we all believe that it's always the community that comes first and livelihoods that we need to really take forward. And I have been in this domain, and I all solely believe that empowering people around us is the way to go. And with seeds, I think your framework is where you bring up solutions from the community. So co-creating with the leaders from the community who then takes it forward. And so my question is, like, how, like, an ordinary citizen be a climate leader, even though they are not in a position, like formally in a formal position. So how can they take forward some climate change initiatives forward at an individual level, or at a community level by themselves?
Achintya, I mean, I feel that if there's any one group that can really bring about change, it is these citizens who are impacted directly and who feel the impacts of climate change, who suffer losses on day-to-day basis. And this has been our thinking, mostly through experience, mostly through working at community level in these various crisis situations, over now, 55 emergencies that we have worked all these years. And I've seen the tremendous power that remains locked up, sorry, in citizens. But when we really bring that out, when we unlock that kind of power, young people especially, we find that they can be very, very active participants, not just participants, real leaders that can bring about change. And uh, there are ways to do that. We have worked on various successful and failed experiments, but what has kind of sustained with us all this while is one, the role of communities, citizens in being able to carry out assessments, assessments about what are the risks in their own communities, what are the changes that they are noticing, what are changes that are good, what are changes that are that can potentially be harmful to their living. So the surveillance part has been one great tool with when given to them has been super useful. The other, and we spoke about this in the previous panel, is about innovation. I think unless the uh, innovation is rooted at the grassroots, things will not change. And we've seen how, we spoke about the extreme heat and the problems of extreme heat. This gets amplified in low income settlements. And that's where we've seen that while we were looking at a different set of parameters that could potentially impact people who are from heat, we found that there was this group who felt that it's not just about access to water or the quality of water, but it's also the temperature of water, which gets super hot in summers. And so we did a very informal kind of a competition with young people, and they came up with brilliant ideas about how do they could insulate those ubiquitous, black tanks that are there in our cities against extreme temperatures. So I think enabling innovation, enabling that kind of assessment is are very powerful ideas that only citizens can do better than anyone else. But then, just to kind of also add this very important aspect about citizen voice and citizen leadership, especially in crisis, becomes very, very important. They are able to actually see small day-to-day risks in their own neighborhoods, in their own environments, which if they are addressed in time and in through innovations such as what I spoke about before, we can mitigate the larger impacts. And therefore, they are the best crisis leaders in their own communities.
Yeah, for sure. Like I remember, when I was in Delhi working with the MCD on the 311 app, when we came out with this air pollution action button, and where we had a bunch of like people who were working all together across the state of Delhi and tracking how the air pollution, dispersed sources of air pollution were creating and havoc, and also addressing it at a very fast-paced manner with the active support from the MCD and the various departments of the government. And I believe where technology and how citizens could partake. I guess you came up with this like a bright technology with the help of governments and corporations in the state of West Bengal. So could you maybe shed some light on how it is being deployed, what is it about, and how can citizens actively take part and create some meaningful action?
Yeah, I mean, the one that you are referring to, Achintya, is in a slightly different context. This was in Bengal, where citizens have been impacted by the cyclone, and this was a particular cyclone Dana that impacted much of the Sundarbans area last year in November. There we are using technology to basically connect citizens to choices that they can make about how to be more resilient to future impacts. And one of the many things that we are trying is, how they can be related to, how they can be linked to parametric insurance schemes, and when done in groups, how that could be, the risk can be better distributed, and therefore they pay lesser premiums. But also, how do they make themselves stronger by being able to access government schemes? So connecting their profiles, their needs, and not just needs, but their wants to government programs, for example, scholarships for children, or for that matter, small loans for people, for farmers. Um, so we are trying to create those linkages where citizens who are impacted and recurrently impacted by climate change manifestations. In this particular case, it is cyclones. How can they become stronger each time by being able to access a whole bouquet of services, not just from government but also from the private sector, and of course civil society organizations? So that's an experiment we are doing. This is in particular case of housing, but we've also tried it in this was in a particular case of a cyclone, but we are also trying this uh, in housing reconstruction after disasters, and many other kind of scenarios and contexts. Yeah.
So, like, we discussed a lot about, how science and technology can help us. So, like, how can we really incorporate all these into our daily life, like, sustainable practices that is blended with climate, which do not like really pinpoint or pin the climate extreme events, or how can we blend in traditional knowledge along with it and play that in our daily lives and make small little changes that really impact this discourse. So what are your thoughts? How can science and nexus of practice play a crucial role in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question, Achintya. Obviously, depending on where I am I in an urban area? Am I in a rural area where there are impacts of floods and cyclone, but in an urban area, impacts of heat and other kinds of climate impacts? I would do different things and I would respond in a different manner. But generally speaking, what we have seen is that we as a society are inherently resilient, right? I mean, we have weathered changing patterns and seasons. We always know about summers and hot summers in the northern areas. We all know about the hot winds like Lou. But obviously, the climate change has bumped up those numbers, right? I mean, there are now more days of heat wave we are experiencing than we used to maybe 20 years ago. Likewise, the number of floods and cyclones impacting Eastern India are now increased to almost three in a year, up from one. So obviously, changes have to be brought about in our lifestyle, in our day-to-day living. And so we can, I mean, I can think of a whole range of things, but I would like to speak about housing. And we realize that, uh, for example, the use of bamboo in architecture, in housing, has to be brought back in a much more scientifically designed manner, in a much more sort of deliberate way. Unfortunately, we still are at the very beginning of that curve in terms of trying to bring about traditional practices. But we built houses on stilts in a flood-prone area in Assam, something that the local communities had discarded long ago. But when we brought it back, we engineered it a little bit to withstand these three floods in a year. And the response has been tremendous. In fact, those particular families have started, uh, growing on that kind of a community of, bamboo housing. They've started adding to that. They've started, sort of connecting back to their own cultural roots in some way, because that was a design that belonged to them. So I think there are many ways you can look at it. How do we do that little top up to say that this is a good traditional practice in this community? How can we look at science and try and improve this to make it more resilient to the kind of climate shocks and stresses that we are experiencing currently?
I guess with like I understand that there's a lot of bridges that are yet to be built in terms of data and information available to the public at a much scale wherein people are ready to accept that, understand that, and implement that in real life. And for that, I guess a lot of collaborations, cross-sector collaborations, and multi-stakeholder, initiatives need to come into play. And how can really, technology and collaboration help in this process? So, like, I was informed that you're working with the team at Aadhaar and interested in deploying technology at scale. So how does this collaboration come into play, and where can this help build bridges in the gaps that are existing at the moment at the grassroots levels?
Yeah, so on the technology bit is something, allow me to step back a little bit to set the context on this. So as we know, and we've been talking about this for the last hour or so, is that the climate change and its impacts are now becoming very, very apparent. The number of incidents of climate-induced disasters has simply doubled every decade, and we are now in a situation where we are seeing almost 5 to 6 disaster events in a single day. So and not just that, we are also witnessing new types of risks. I mean, heat, like we heard this morning, was is become one of the biggest disasters, something that was never even declared a disaster. It's only recently that the national government and many state governments are now declaring heat as a disaster. There are large number of deaths that are taking place due to thunder and lightning strikes or cloud bursts. So it's not just the scale and the frequency and intensity of disasters, it's also these new risks that we are witnessing. And therefore, we need to obviously look at it from a very different lens now. At the same time, the number of people who are getting impacted, we are seeing, and we did some study earlier, that almost a fourth of our country, 300 to 400 million people are getting impacted adversely by climate change. So if I'm looking at that kind of number and that kind of a complexity, that's where technology comes in to help us design something at scale, right? And we are working with the Center for Exponential Change, the people who also designed the Aadhaar, to look at how do we reach out, or how do communities have the agency at such large numbers to be able to not just be able to report what is the impact that they are experiencing, but also be able to access better and more need-based services and relief assistance as and when they get impacted. So that's the plan, that where we feel the digital technologies can really help us reach that scale and complexity.
Yeah. I guess also coming on to the impact and how do we really go down into the measure of devastating effects that they are facing, especially at the coastal communities when we are talking about, like hurricanes that are affecting the coastal communities of states like Kerala down in the south. In the east, we have Odisha, West Bengal. I just wanted to understand how do they rebuild and build back better from the devastating effects of these climate extreme events. And also I have been doing some readings around this, and I also saw that a lot of these, especially the gendered effects that they face, like because a lot of the women are forced into labor or into sex work just because of the impacts of the hurricanes or cyclones that are hitting these coastal states. So how do all of these come to play, and how can we really build back from that? Or are there any substitute where we can maybe come in with a solution to help these communities build back their livelihoods from what they have lost during the extreme event? So any thoughts on that, on the livelihood aspect, and how can community resilience or communities come into play in that uh, whole
Yeah.
scenario?
Yeah, so Achintya, you really touched upon something very, very sensitive and close to our hearts in seeds. You're right. I mean, there have been, cases of, distress migration, human trafficking, and other social ills, especially from areas that have been recurrently impacted by cyclones, hurricanes, or floods in Odisha, Bengal, and also other parts of the country. Uh, One of the fundamental problems that we are not looking at as from a systems perspective is that we still don't have an accurate understanding of what is the impact, right? We still think in terms of life loss, right? Which is not the only indicator. In fact, we are fortunate to have brought down life loss from these disasters in our country. It is actually the other kinds of losses, and that never gets recorded. Not only that, the marginalized never even get to report or become visible on our radar screens as to what are they suffering. So some of their existing marginalization is actually amplified in such crisis situations. So normally one would have coping mechanisms. Every family does. Even we have. Whenever there is a crisis, we find ways to cope with that crisis. But here they have actually crossed the tipping point. They don't get the help that they need because they are not even visible to the external agencies, to the system about how they are suffering, and therefore they uh, go in for very, very desperate coping mechanisms, which includes distress migration, that includes human trafficking, and so on and so forth. Um, so our whole idea is how do we build resilience and help them become more adaptive to these kind of changing conditions. I mean, they can't do much to mitigate it, right? What they can do is to adapt to it better. And therefore, the whole focus is being that let's stop them from, going to those extremes that we always find, and that number is increasing. How do we stop them from increasing? And therefore, we look at, safe habitats, we look at improvement in livelihoods, how they could look at not just paddy farming, which can then get be swept away in a single flood, to also backyard farming, which can at least sustain minimum, levels of income and sustain them in wherever they are. So that is the whole idea here, Chintya.
We often like just always look at the direct economic losses that we are, struggling with or facing, and we often tend to overlook the indirect losses or the non-economic damages in terms of mental, physical damages, damages to the whole society in terms of, okay, the schools are shut down and they are not having a daily social interaction. The social circle gets collapsed, and there's migration. So there's a lot of uncertainty that goes into play, which really affects the transition. And I believe it's very keen. I mean, it's high time that we look into this domain as well, and find out a more better coping mechanism, and have a more just and a better future for everyone. So yeah, uh, moving on to my very last question. We have talked so much about technology, science, and now, in this generation, where chat gpt is taking over, ai is the new uh, you know player, in a player in the society. And how do active citizens take part in this discussion? How they be prepared to not end up as victims, but as active contributors, help in reaching that just and better green future for everyone? And how do they respond to the whole climate change discourse? So what's your take, and what's that word for your audience?
My word, Achintya, and I'm very inspired by the kind of leadership you've played. I think one of the first messages I'll give is to emulate people like you and yourself and how you've taken that leadership role in society. I think that's very much what I would like to see young people do in this. But more broadly speaking, I would think that, uh, it's about lifestyle changes. It's about linking it to our ikigai. How do we think of climate change as a primary issue in our daily lives? Once we start doing that, I think we will create that spiral of change, and that spiral of change would mean, being able to amplify our voices that would bring about societal change. So one of the things, for example, is what we could do as citizens is start looking at our own health. Health is the number one and the first indicator of vulnerability to climate change in anyone's life. And so how do we address those issues of health by being more active, by being physically sensitive to changes in our own body, and therefore looking at health and well-being as the first point, but also then looking at maybe less meat, for example, eating less meat, and then switching to more renewable sources of energy in terms of you know uh, transport and less air conditioning and housing. So there's a whole lot. I mean, and I think it's very, very individual. That's why I said it's our ikigai there that we do. But I think the most important thing, and this is where I would really go back to the Indian diaspora, the group here, to Amita and colleagues, to MR, that we need to have these conversations more often. I think climate change was never an agenda when you started off, right? I mean, when the Indian diaspora started, now it has become a conversation like the one we are having today. So it's very important that we get more and more people talking about it, and when we talk, we are able to find the solutions, the innovations, which can then go back into our lives. So not maybe this is my overall message to all of us.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, due to the interest of time, we are not able to take any questions, but I'll be happy to, kind of direct any questions to you over email,
Sure.
if from the audience. And I now hand it over to Sharanya. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Achintya. Really nice speaking to you.
Thank you, Achintya, for leading such an engaging conversation on building community resilience. And thank you, Manu, for your excellent insights.